It is so important that we are laughing at this point in the semester, especially our deans. Good morning, EMU. Good morning, EMU. Good morning, EMU. It is good to be together. As we know, we are all feeling the opportunities and the stresses of this point in the semester. It's good to come together, to be in this space as we get to celebrate excellence as it shows up in each one of you. It's a gift to gather for our Academic and Creative Excellence Festival. This moment in our year, each year where the center of our campus shifts, quite intentionally, to the work of our students. Today and tomorrow, classrooms give way to conversations, to presentations, performances, and questions that stretch across our disciplines and invite us to deeper curiosity together. The ACE Festival is at its heart a celebration of student scholarship. It's where ideas take shape, not only in papers and research, but in art, in performance, in creative expression, and in the courage that it takes to share one's thinking with others. What makes this space particularly meaningful is that it's not just about expertise alone. It's about learning in community. Here, students learn from one another. We engage perspectives across our fields, and we practice the kind of communication and collaboration that will shape our lives beyond today and this semester. This year, we've been gathering around the theme of sustainability, a word that has held lots of meaning with both urgency and possibility. Sustainability invites us to consider how our relationships with the world, how we live within it, how we care for it, and how we imagine a future that is both just and enduring. As our keynote speaker, Dr. Deborah Lawrence, reflects, sustainability is rooted in recognizing our deep connection to the earth, one that calls forth knowledge, gratitude, and responsibility. But sustainability is not just an environmental question, it's a question about systems and communities and how we sustain one another. It lives in business decisions and healthcare practices, in education and peace building and art, all across these themes that are very close to our work and what we're doing. This is why this festival matters. It creates a space to explore sustainability, not from a single lens, but across our disciplines, across our experiences, and across our ways of knowing. What I hope you experience over these next days is not just exposure to new ideas, but genuine engagement with them. Sit in a session that's outside your major. Ask a question that stretches you. Listen for connections that you didn't expect. Let this time be one of curiosity where we practice the kind of thoughtful, respectful dialogue that our world so deeply needs. And to our students, this is your moment. Thank you for the discipline, for the creativity, for the courage, for the time invested, your willingness to contribute your voice to this community, this learning community. You are not only participating in scholarship, but you are shaping it. Welcome to ACE Festival. Let's learn well, engage deeply, and imagine together what's possible. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Jennifer Ulrich, and I'm one of the chairs for the ACE Festival this year. And I have a few details, because there's always details. So note that today's convocation will go until 11:15 today. Typically, convocation is over at 11:05, but today we're going to 11:15. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank a lot of people, because it takes a lot to make this event happen. So thank you to the EMU's DEI office, the Daniel B. Suter Endowment, and the Center for Interfaith Engagement for collaborating with ACE Festival and the Provost Office to bring Dr. Deborah Lawrence as our keynote speaker. And then thank you to many people who have provided assistance with the festival. For Clay Showalter for preparing and coordinating technology for this keynote and other events. The Earmark staff for space setup and assistance. Darren Campbell and the Pioneer staff for catering assistance. the many faculty, mentors, session moderators, and those who have helped with the poster shows. I'd also like to thank Diane Farrar in the Science Center for her advice and assistance this year as well, and a great big thank you to Emily North, April Gordon, Devin LaCroix, and Taylor Martin for their coordinating virtually almost everything in this festival. So thank you to them. So, and I want to wish everyone who is presenting and the faculty moderators tomorrow good luck and best wishes as you make your presentations. And following Deborah Lawrence's presentation, there'll be more details as well. And so now our Provost Tynesha Willingham will introduce Dr. Lawrence.
Good morning, everyone. It is wonderful to be with you on this warm spring day. Surprised at how fast it went from being chilly to now feeling like a summer day. Thank you, Jennifer, for all of your planning, support, leadership, and care for this year's ACE Festival. She and I are technically co-chairs, but I would say she's chaired it. So really grateful for her leadership and vision, and for bringing Dr. Deborah Lawrence to us, who I have the pleasure of introducing today. Dr. Lawrence is the chief scientist at Calyx Global. She leads efforts to ensure the scientific integrity of greenhouse gas ratings and directs research and analytics for both nature-based solutions and engineered carbon dioxide removal. She brings a remarkable depth of expertise shaped by more than 25 years as a professor of environmental science at the University of Virginia, where her work focused on global forest systems and climate dynamics. She also enjoys teaching undergraduates. In addition to her academic career, Dr. Lawrence has contributed significantly to national and international climate efforts. She served as a science advisor to the U.S. Department of State's Office of Global Change, supporting climate policy and international negotiations. She also played a key role in establishing Silva Carbon, a U.S. federal interagency program dedicated to forest carbon measurement and monitoring, where she served on the steering committee and chaired the technical team. Her leadership extends to the American Carbon Registry, where she served on the technical committee on agriculture, forestry, and other land use. Dr. Lawrence holds a Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology from Harvard University and a PhD in Botany from Duke University. Beyond her professional accomplishments, she enjoys tending her climate-forward backyard and gathering family and friends around the table, an extension of her commitment to community and care for the environment. Let's welcome Dr. Deborah Lawrence.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me here to speak. It's truly an honor. And thank you so much for making me read Braiding Sweetgrass. It's one of my favorite students who told me to read this book about 6 years ago. As she said I would love it, she said I would relate to it, but I just never seemed to have the time. I've read it now, and I am so grateful. Robin Wall Kimmerer really did speak to me. So today, I'm going to share some reflections that I had reading her book, thinking about her life and my life. I'm going to talk to you about our connection to nature, a gift, joy, grief, and a life's work. I have spent my life studying nature, but the life's work I want to focus on is on connecting to nature. That is the work that is ultimately sustaining for all of us. It is the work that will also sustain the earth that supports us. So I want to start with grief. In a sense, I want to get it out of the way. But I also want to honor it because it's there. So I choose grief, eco-grief, and not eco-anxiety. I choose grief as a point of departure to understanding our connection to nature. It is defined as sadness at the loss of ecosystems and living beings. Sometimes I'm overwhelmed by the losses that we've already seen. and the losses that I see coming because I spent so much time studying, teaching, researching, talking, teaching about climate change. I am saddened that we have increased the rate of extinction 100 or 1,000-fold, that we will be driving the 6th mass extinction. That is not some alarmist idea. Those are the facts. And though I tell myself that the earth and that biodiversity, it came back after those mass extinctions, I'm still sad. I feel the loss, and I'm sad that humans are responsible. Grief is distinct from eco-anxiety. Anxiety, to me, seems like a perfectly rational response to what is happening around us. We don't know exactly how climate change will unfold, but we know that it will be challenging, and we know that we're not moving fast enough to address it. That would make anyone anxious. Where we live, how we live, is at risk. That seems normal and doesn't seem like a way that we define our relationship to nature. Grief implies a different relationship to the earth. Feeling grief is a way we know that the earth is more than just a place where we live. It's a place we love. We would not feel sadness if we felt no love. So I just want you to remember that. If you are feeling sad about what's going on in the world, about the natural world, you're also feeling love. You are connected to nature. But it's hard to feel grief in the springtime. What a glorious time of year. Am I right? Yeah. So Professor Kimmerer might argue that all times of year are glorious, that all times of the year have something to show us in different ways about our connection to nature. She actually made me want to plant witch hazel, which I do not know what it looks like, even though I'm a botanist, because witch hazel has yellow flowers in November. That is a gift. But spring is a great time for experiencing the gift of nature. Life is simply bursting out all around us, and it's an amazing thing. We can all feel connected to nature when life is suddenly in front of us again after a long winter. Unlike Professor Kimmerer, many of us were not raised with the teachings of the indigenous peoples, with stories and ceremonies that remind us of the gifts we receive from the earth and the gifts we owe in return. And not being botanists either, like her, we may not have had the pleasure of studying photosynthesis, the incredible process that turns air into matter. Seriously, think about that. Magical. That air that gets turned into matter by photosynthesis is how spring happens. That's how the plants come back to life. Photosynthesis takes something you cannot see and turns it into something you can touch and eat. That's amazing. Most of us do not think about the air much. We are not atmospheric scientists who explore the interactions among the sun and the tilt of the earth and the land surface to understand the way the atmosphere moves. The atmosphere that brings us the gusty winds of March and April, every March and every April, because those things, the tilt of the earth, the land surface, the sun, they're eternal. It's all magical, even if you understand how and why it happens. So we are not botanists, we are not atmospheric scientists, and yet, every year, we can all experience the sheer pleasure of spring. The light, bright green of the new leaves, the deep, almost fluorescent pink of the red buds, the luminous white of dogwoods, the sunny yellow of daffodils. And before all the showy flowers come out, you might catch a scent of tiny flowers you can't even see from some evergreen bush on campus. As I walk around in the spring with my dog, I find myself suddenly engaged, a whiff of something greenish or sweet, something intoxicating, and I look around to try to find the flowers. What are the flowers that are giving me this beautiful scent? Spring is also noisy in the best of ways. The birds are back. The birds are busy, they're loud. Just listen, and you'll hear them all day. I hope you've experienced that here in the last couple of weeks. You were connected to nature. I was just your age, when I first realized that I really was connected to nature. In my family, we never talked about nature. My parents were not gardeners or fishermen or hunters, and though we occasionally went hiking and we lived near the ocean, I don't recall much reverence. Pleasure, joy, fun, yes, but not really a sense of awe or gratitude. Maybe at sunset, who can look at a sunset and not feel some awe? But I know I was affected by the horizon, the opening up I experienced after day after day after day and years of looking out to where the ocean meets the sky. I only realized that later, once I spent so much time in the forest without a horizon. Since I was 20, I've spent time studying or living in the forest, first in the tropics of Indonesia, Cameroon, Costa Rica, Mexico, East Africa, and then in the Southeast, in North Carolina and Virginia. When I get back to the ocean now, I realize the horizon is a part of me. But I was just your age when I first recognized that nature means something to me. If you don't have a deep connection to nature yet, I'm not surprised, and I'm not worried. I think it will happen. I think it could easily happen. And I know you'll have a chance to deepen your connection to nature. And you don't have to go to the rainforest of Borneo to do that. But that is where my connection began, a connection that has sustained me ever since. When I was in college, I spent a year in the rainforest of Kalimantan, the Indonesian part of the island of Borneo in Southeast Asia. I was working for my professor, Mark Layton, on plant-animal interactions. There were a dozen of us there, half of us students and half Indonesian staff. We lived in Gunung Palung National Park. It's about a day by boat from the nearest town, and about another day by a much faster boat to the nearest telephone, or what you might call a supermarket, or you might just call a place to buy food. Our main task was to walk a specific route through the forest, starting at dawn, and to record every animal we observed, noting what it was doing, and especially what it was eating. We made notes, we tagged trees, we collected their leaves and fruits. So if you're trying to observe animals, it's best to be quiet, which means we went alone. I have never spent so much time by myself, before or since. My first impression of the rainforest was probably of the gibbons, one of the lesser, smaller apes, singing together the morning after I arrived, letting the other gibbon pairs know that they were alive and well and defending their territory. But it might have been the night before when a troop of long-tailed macaques, another primate with actual tails, they were crashing through the trees, racing down branches, leaping from tree to tree in front of the main cabin, where just near the river where they were on their way home to their sleeping tree. Or perhaps it was the wild boar that lurked behind our camp, eyeing us warily while we cooked and rooting around in the compost pile next to our open-air kitchen. It was weeks or maybe months before I saw my first orangutan in the wild. That made a huge impression on me because it's like they're just like us. But that was not my first impression of the rainforest. Nope. My first impression of the forest hit me when I was out walking by myself. The rainforest was messy. Logs of all sizes laid about the forest floor in various stages of decay, covered with mosses and mushrooms. Some of the down trees were so big that I had to sort of hoist myself up and scooch around and drop off the other side just to continue along the trail. Why was it so messy? I sort of thought it was going to be glamorous. I don't know. Well, it was messy because it was a forest, a mature forest that had been around for thousands of years. And that's what a forest looks like. Old trees shed branches, and every so often they die, eventually to come crashing down in a thunderstorm. All the while, new trees, slowly growing with no light whatsoever, they work their way up into the canopy, waiting for an opening. Until that year, the only trees that I had noticed stood next to sidewalks and driveways, and I had not really paid them much attention. In a rainforest, the animals are few and far between, and they do not stick around. They are busy, they move on. It's hard to keep up with them because they don't stick to the trail system. So I spent a lot of time with the trees. Through binoculars, trying to count fruit in branches 150 feet above my head, sniffing a cut in the tree bark to see if I could identify the genus, rummaging among fallen leaves to find flowers or half-eaten fruits to identify the species, and then draping a measuring tape above the buttress roots of a big tree, trying to record the diameter of the tree trunk. That was my work with trees. There were also times when I simply was with the trees, among the trees, walking, listening, looking, thinking, being. I was alone with the trees for hours every day. It changed me. I started out answering the questions posed by my professor. Along the way, I started asking my own questions. I followed the trails that he had blazed with all of his assistants through the rainforest, and then I left the trails and I followed my own compass. I had arrived at college 3 years earlier with no major in mind, pretending to be a pre-med major so I would have something to say when asked. Anyone do that? Okay. I did not know what I was going to do. When I returned home from that year, I had a sense of purpose I'd never felt before. I wanted to save the rainforest. Not just because it was amazing, full of plants and animals that had co-evolved over millions of years. It's because I loved it. The rainforest had held me for a year, given me a place to learn about nature and about myself. What a gift. My year in the rainforest was the kind of gift Robin Wall Kimmerer would recognize well, the kind that requires a gift in return. I did not manage to save the rainforest, but I have devoted much of my life to understanding what we're doing to it and what it means. After that first year, living in ancient forests, I have always studied secondary tropical forests, the forests that come back after a big disturbance, like a landslide or a fire or agriculture. I was worried. And so I was trying to answer the question, if we keep disturbing the rainforests, will it come back? Before and during graduate school, I conducted research on shifting cultivation, also known as slash and burn agriculture. I lived and worked among the Dayak people, the indigenous people of Borneo, about 30 kilometers north of Gunung Palung National Park, where I first spent that year. Shifting cultivation happens in cycles. First, you have a mature forest. You cut it down, let it dry out, burn it. The nutrients fall into the soil enough to grow crops, annual crops for a year or so, and then you leave it, and the forest returns. And at a certain point, you come back, you cut the forest again, dry it, burn it, grow some crops, and then leave it. I was looking for what happens when you disturb a forest again and again, so I went to a place where the people had been doing that for 200 years. Practicing shifting cultivation in the same place. I should have known before I started that they probably had the answer, that maybe it's all okay. They were there for 200 years after all. But being a scientist, I thought I could just prove it to myself. I found that soil nutrients recover as the trees grow back, but it takes time. Over multiple cycles of slash and burn or shifting cultivation, some of the nutrients shift to less available forms. But fire and a long fallow period, the period while the forest is coming back, those things can actually transform the nutrients back into forms that are more available, that they can sustain a new crop and they can sustain the regrowth of the forest. The diversity of the trees in those little forests, those secondary forests, declines with every cycle of disturbance. It's too bad. So the species diversity in the trees just goes down over those hundreds of years. But there's a reservoir of diversity in the saplings and seedlings below. So the trees don't look so great, or they're declining in diversity, but below there's a lot of diversity, a whole reservoir of species, some of them coming from the mature forest far away. The problem is they need time too, time to grow and reproduce. So when humans disturb the rainforest again and again, there's hope, but there is a limit. When I got to UVA as a professor, my students and I started studying shifting cultivation in southern Mexico, in the Yucatan Peninsula. We were there for over a decade, part of a broader project started by my colleague Billy Turner at Clark University. The project focused on the causes and the consequences of deforestation. My ecology group, we focused mostly on the consequences. We worked with economists, historians, anthropologists, and geographers. Eventually, I brought in atmospheric scientists and hydrologists. We covered so many dimensions of the human-forest interaction. It was great. At the time, I would have said that humans' connection to nature was perhaps 2/3 destructive and 1/3 constructive. In my scientific life, I was constantly aware of our effect on nature. Very little of it good. In my personal life, however, I did see the other side, the effect of nature on us. While I was studying deforestation in the tropics, I was also playing in the backyard with my young children. I was seeing the natural world through their eyes. We turned over rocks and flower pots, and we watched insects scurry around. We watched dragonflies zooming around our bird bath, and we watched birds fluttering around inside the bird bath. We dashed outside as the geese flew over our house, honking on their way to the river, hoping to catch a glimpse. And we spent hours in a nearby creek, or maybe it was just a storm sewer, catching crayfish and letting the little fish nibble our toes. I tell you this because you can also do this, even though you're not kids. You can get out there if you have a bit of landscaping that you particularly like, if you have a patio, if you have a garden, if you have access to a farm or a park or a forest. You can connect with nature. During this time, I also started my first vegetable garden. Robin Wall Kimmerer has lots to say about vegetable gardens. I will tell you now that I was not as good as she was at helping her children to understand that they had a role to play in the garden as well. But I do remember my son in diapers plucking cherry tomatoes from the middle of a patch of cherry tomato vines and just shoving them into his mouth one after the other. Was there awe? Were we reverent? Did I teach my kids about reciprocity? I'm not sure. I think they sensed that nature's bounty was a gift. I watched them in wonder. Wonder abounds in a garden. And so that wonder, that may be awe. It certainly helped me realize that I had the capacity for wonder and awe, even though I was old. They watched me tend my garden, plant, water, weed, harvest. For me, those are acts of devotion and reverence and joy. But it's hard for me to see that work as anything but a gift to myself. Perhaps that is the essence of reciprocity, when both sides are enriched. About 20 years after I first went to Indonesia, I had been sidetracked from my purpose. I was dazzled by the science, studying the rainforest, but not saving it. I loved research, but I wanted to do more. So I went to Washington, D.C. as a Jefferson Science Fellow. This was a program that brought faculty, professors, took them out of academia and said, hey, you might know something that could help these people. And they put us into various agencies of the US government to bring science to policy. Perfect. I served in the climate office of the US Department of State, working under Donna Lee, the lead negotiator on tropical deforestation and climate change. Deforestation at the time was 20% of global carbon dioxide emissions. 20%, 1/5 of the problem. Who knew that deforestation was actually driving climate change? It's now closer to 10, maybe not even 10%. And I hate to tell you that's not because deforestation has declined, but because fossil fuel emissions have increased. But at the time, deforestation was a big part of it, and I was there trying to help. I think I brought science to policy a grand total of 3 times that year. Mostly, I watched and listened and learned. I realized that people doing policy often had questions that scientists weren't answering. Some of them were simple questions. They just weren't groundbreaking enough. They were important to those people. They were important to the United States. They were important to the world that was grappling with how to address deforestation so we could make a dent in climate change. There were questions like, how much can India continue to increase its forest cover? Or what is the impact of Brazil's promise to reduce deforestation? Or is Indonesia's peat forest moratorium meaningful? They needed answers right away, and they needed them in simple language. No hiding behind jargon or fancy words or behind caveats like worries about uncertainty or complexity. Scientists have a lot to offer, but we need to be courageous. It is out of our comfort zone to deliver answers quickly, simply, and without caveats. During my year at the State Department, I also realized that the people who focused on deforestation on the 3rd floor with me, they were not the same as the ones who worried about food security on the 7th floor, or the people who contemplated the role of biofuels in a better climate future. They weren't even in the building. And yet, policies to advance food, forests, or biofuels all start with the same exact land surface of this one planet. This problem followed me back to UVA. People are not talking together, forests and food and fuels. I had spent my career trying to understand how the history and the landscape position of a particular piece of forest that turned into a farm affected the future growth and diversity and functioning of the rainforest. I had been asking how farmers' decisions about where to clear next, how far it was from the main body of the rainforest, how many years of fallow or regrowth, how these decisions affect the resilience of the rainforest. Suddenly, I was seeing rainforest in a broader context of the Earth system, critical to the resilience of the entire biosphere. I needed to understand what happened in more than a few villages, to understand the role of tropical forests in the climate system, and to ponder the effect of deforestation on the ecosystems that support humanity. I needed to consider the decisions of millions and millions of farmers. I turned to climate models. It's the only way to experiment with the Earth's surface on a massive scale. Or rather, it's the only safe way to do that experiment. My research that year after the State Department was policy-focused. I was trying to answer questions that seemed to be needed, that people needed those answers. But I was out of my depth in many respects, so I collaborated with colleagues from law, economics, engineering, anthropology and ethics, as well as hydrology and atmospheric sciences and geography and ecology. How else can you study the effects of land use decisions on the climate system, the feedbacks on human well-being, and the ecosystems they depend on? Those are big topics. That is not just a topic for one scientist. We need all kinds of thinkers to study the effects of land use and climate change. And certainly we need all kinds of thinkers and doers when we take what we learn and try to actually use it to address climate change. I had some truly challenging and rewarding conversations during that period, as all of us from our different disciplines tried to understand each other and work together to frame questions that we could answer with a climate model. It didn't always work, but we knew it was important, so we tried. We added to a growing body of knowledge that shows tropical forests affect climate in many ways. Tropical deforestation leads to warming. It leads to warming locally partly because of physical factors, but it leads to deforestation globally because of the release of CO2 into the atmosphere. It increases the risk of extreme heat, again, locally, right there in the rainforest, and globally. It alters rainfall patterns, both nearby and a bit downwind throughout the region, and even on different continents. How can that be? Well, even though the land is broken up by rivers and urban areas and even oceans, the land surface is broken up. The atmosphere is not. The land surface talks to the atmosphere moves that information somewhere else, and it affects the land surface. So rainfall, deforestation in the tropics affects rainfall in the US Northwest. It's all connected. Intact tropical forests actually cool the Earth's surface. This is because they move water on a massive scale. They're massive, these forests are massive. There's lots of air, there's lots of sunlight, and there's lots of rainfall. So they move water from the soil surface up through their stems and out through tiny holes in the underside of the leaf called stomata. When the water exits the leaf, it changes from liquid to vapor. That transformation, liquid to vapor, that requires heat. So that transformation, just at the leaf surface, takes heat out of the atmosphere. It cools the air above the tropical forest. And in fact, it has cooling effects all over the place. Tropical rainforests they're like the air conditioners for the land surface, literally. Surely that is the kind of gift that we should be feeling some reciprocity about. Because tropical forests give us this most profound gift of all, a safer, stabler climate. My research was not the only thing that changed after my year in Washington, D.C. I also changed the focus of my teaching. It was all climate, all the time. I had been teaching about climate change as part of my regular ecology classes. It usually got a lecture or two. But after spending a year in the State Department with people who were so dedicated to forging a global agreement to addressing climate change, I thought their job would be easier if everyone understood exactly how the climate system works and how it's changing and what it means, what is at stake. Surely we just needed to know more, and more people needed to know more. So I taught a seminar on tropical forests and climate change. I taught a class that was cross-listed at the law school on the science and policy of climate change. I taught a large introductory class called Climate U and CO2. My goal was to teach every incoming freshman. There's about 2,500 at UVA, so I maxed out around 300 students, but I loved that class. At some point, however, I realized that knowledge was not necessarily the problem. We actually know most of the science that we need to know in order to take action on climate change. We have the interdisciplinary perspectives that would make those actions more effective and more equitable. I started thinking about what motivates people to act. I don't think people act based on information. They have to care. And how can we get people to care? I decided to try connecting critical knowledge with art. It started as a one-credit class called Write Climate, W-R-I-T-E. It was inspired by an artist named Morgan O'Hara, who was upset by politics. She took a copy of the Constitution to the public library, and she sat down and she wrote it out by hand. And then she asked the people around her to write with her. And it turned into a bit of a movement. You can Google it. I thought, I could do that with the Paris Climate Agreement. I introduced my students to classic texts on climate change, science, and policy, from the earliest recognition of the way CO2 traps heat in the atmosphere, to the Keeling curve that shows not only is CO2 increasing over time in the atmosphere, but it goes up and down with the seasons, showing us how the biosphere is basically breathing. I also showed them the documents around the establishment of the Environmental Protection Agency under President Nixon a Republican president. I showed them the history of the development of the CO2 record from millions of years trapped in ice. And I finally showed them the Paris Agreement. I really wanted them to write out the entire Paris Agreement. It was like my constitution. I tried it myself, and I had to stop after 45 minutes, nowhere close to done. I did not think I could get my students to sit and write for hours. So we read them, and then we selected our favorite fragments. We wrote out those short fragments. We wrote them by hand as we were learning the history and learning the science. And then the students asked their friends to write with them. They went to their sorority houses and their dorms and their locker rooms. And then we tabled across campus. And then we tabled in Charlottesville, asking people to write about climate. An interesting thing happened after one of the first few days. The students came back and said, Professor Lawrence, people don't want to just write about the policy or the science. And I said, what? What do they want to write about? And they said they want to write about how they feel about climate change. And they want to write about what they're doing about it. And I said, great. So we expanded our project. We introduced some of the classic texts. We introduced some of the classic ideas, but we also let people just write with us about climate. We ended up with thousands and thousands of pieces of paper. And finally, out of the pieces of paper, the students created works of art. We had a big opening, and the show ran for a couple of weeks, and thousands of their classmates saw the show. One student told me that she had never expected to actually accomplish something in a class about climate change, much less feel good about it. The students did have some advice for the next time. They said they thought it would be nice to work together on one piece of art. And they thought we could use the help of an actual artist. A local artist, Amanda Nelson, actually found me after hearing about the project. And we ended up teaching the class together for several years. What a gift and what a joy. As I was doing research and teaching about climate and trying to figure out how to communicate the urgency of climate change, I took great pleasure advising the students who came through my office, through my classes, on their way out the door. I can say right now what I said back then many times. Everyone can make a difference on climate. It doesn't matter what your work is. Whatever your interest is, you can work on climate. You don't have to be a scientist or an economist or a policymaker to work on climate change. It will affect every aspect of our lives. So no matter what job you do, you will face the effects of climate change. Mitigation, adaptation, transformation. Those are that is the work of engineers and architects and planners, sure. People who make cool devices, technologies, tools that will help us fix this problem, right. But it's also the work of doctors and nurses and artists and writers and teachers and public servants. And at those companies where they make those great tools and technologies that will help us in our transition, they're just companies. They have office staff and HR workers and accountants and salespeople and CEOs. Regular jobs, all the regular jobs. Everyone has a contribution to make. I truly believe that. Finally, after sending climate warriors out into the world for years, I decided that I wanted to be a climate warrior myself. So 4 years ago, I gave up my job as a professor to become the chief scientist at Calyx Global, a startup. We are a carbon credit offset rating agency. We judge the integrity of carbon credits that are used to make carbon neutral claims. So corporations have a goal, and they try to reduce their emissions. And if they can't reduce their emissions 100%, whatever's left, they buy carbon credits. Someone else has reduced emissions elsewhere. They buy those credits, and they use them to make up the difference. It's a voluntary market. There are no regulators. So In a sense, Calyx Global is like the greenwashing police. I still do science every day, but my target is different. I actually think of it as the flip side of my academic research. I used to study nature's climate solutions, how forest and land can alter climate. Now I study how those solutions get put into action, bundled up, and sold as carbon credits. And my job is to be sure that they are delivering the climate impact that they promise. There have been several times in my life when I felt like I was going to college again, like I was on fire with learning. When I came home from the hospital after giving birth to my first child, that was a big one. When I went to Washington, D.C., where honest to God, they were speaking English, but I could not understand what was being said for weeks. Talk about culture clash. And then when I started working on climate models, that is a whole nother language. And finally, when I started working at Calyx Global, it was all new, but so exciting. The nice thing about a startup is that the learning phase lasts a long time, so I am still learning. Learning is for all of us, not just the scientists and the scholars. As I read Braiding Sweetgrass, I realized that for Professor Kimmerer, studying plants was simply a way to deepen her connection to them and to nature. I feel the same way. Studying the rainforest, studying the earth system, it's not a substitute for a spiritual connection, but rather another way to express it. Trying to know something is a way to love it. That's what I wish for all of you while you're here in college. Study something deeply. It will change the way you view the world, including yourself, including nature. Studying something deeply does not need to start or end with nature, but I hope you will give it a chance. Studying nature, knowing nature, connecting with nature, it really just starts with paying attention. Nothing else is needed. What a gift indeed. Thank you very much. I told Jennifer, thank you so much. I told Jennifer I'm very happy to take some questions,
So
like what
we have some
exactly did I
time.
do to bring science to policy?
So if anybody
Or any questions? Or like, did I really spend a year by myself in the rainforest?
Yeah, did you really?
I really did.
Yeah.
It was the longest time
Was
I'd ever
it-
been basically by myself.
Were you just by yourself on the
No.
one day, on the days?
Yeah.
And you didn't have anybody else with you when you were observing
Right, that would
animals?
never happen today, I'm sorry, because the liability is so bad. The idea that I was an undergraduate working for a professor by myself in the middle of the island of Borneo with no help. Yes, that is truly what happened. It would not happen today. And in fact, when I took students to the forest, I never had them go alone. But we didn't study animals. We were studying soils and trees, and it doesn't matter if you're noisy. It's actually good to have a big crowd because it keeps the snakes at bay.
So does anybody have a question or comment or
Reaction.
reaction?
What were some of the things you found when you were like monitoring these companies? Are most of them like keeping up with what they're promising, or is there a big gap there?
Thank you for that question. So, we do not actually monitor the companies. We monitor what they're using. And in fact, the companies are the ones who pay us to provide the ratings. They care. They do not want to make a bad claim. They do not want to greenwash. They actually want to meet their goals. So, they will come to us and say, we've been offered this portfolio of credits from different types of activities. Can you tell us which ones are good, which ones are really delivering a ton of CO2 for that ton that we're going to claim? And so we give them the ratings, and hopefully the goal is that they buy the ones that are rated highly. I would say if there's a place where people are failing to actually do their job, the corporate actors, it's that somebody out there is still buying some really bad credits. Like, we've rated them poorly, everyone knows they're poor, and yet they are still being bought. Perhaps because they're cheap, or perhaps because they actually bought them a few years ago and they made a big giant commitment, and so they're trickling out the actions. But our company's doing a good job. Many companies are. The top tier that you all know very well, that is in the news all the time, they are working very hard. They have serious climate commitments, and they are, I would say, doing a good job of meeting their commitments with high quality offsets when they're not doing their own emission reductions. There's a whole tier below the big top 10 or 20, and those are the ones we'd like to see act, because that's a lot of the economy, and we'd like to see them act too.
What tends to be the most effective offset? Are this planting trees, or is it public transport?
That's a good question too. Of course, I am partial to planting trees, but you'd be surprised. There are funny issues with trees, like what if you're a timber company and you plant trees anyway? Well, that is not a carbon action, that is not a climate action, that is just business as usual. But people surprisingly will try to sell those credits. So, not always perfect. You can't just plant a tree and be guaranteed that it's a good climate action. I will tell you one that is almost 100% fail-safe. That is rounding up ozone-depleting substances. Things like refrigerants. They're in your refrigerators and your air conditioners, and they're in fields in Virginia. These old things that have these chemicals inside them that are slowly leaking out into the atmosphere. People go around and they gather up those chemicals and they put them in giant canisters, and then I actually don't know what they do. Maybe they explode them. I don't know what happens. They change that huge greenhouse effect, those molecules that have great warming potential. They turn them into CO2. Done. It's great. So that is a perfect carbon offset. Ozone depleting substances. There's a range. There's so many different things. And actually, at Calyx Global, we would say our slogan would probably be check at the project level, because you can't just say buy this kind of thing, because there's a lot of choices and it's not a regulated market. Thanks for that.
Question
Yeah.
from braiding sweetgrass.
Yes.
Was there anything of indigenous wisdom, spirituality, or ritual as communicated by Kimmerer that informs you now, maybe shapes you, perhaps provoked or challenged you, or affirms you?
Well, I just loved the work. I'm not sure if I was responding to her or to all the wisdom, or if she was channeling the wisdom. I just loved the book. Partly, and I didn't want to talk about this because I'm not sure you guys can relate to it yet, but as a mother and her experience with her children and with the earth really rang true for me. So if that's indigenous, then I very much responded to that. And don't worry, you're going to do it. It's going to be great. You're going to love those kids, and they are going to love nature.
We might have time for one more.
How would you say conversations around climate change have changed within the last 10, maybe 20 years?
Well, gosh, I feel like we've gone through this arc. So 20 years ago, I'm teaching fundamentals of ecology, and I'm showing graphs about CO2 levels and temperature, and it's not. So I'm telling you the science part first. The science part was 25 years ago, say 20 years ago, it was still within the realm of natural variability. The theory was strong. The theory has always been strong. There's just no doubt about what happens when you put CO2 into the atmosphere. But we could still say, maybe it's in the realm of natural variability, which by the way is plus or minus half a degree Celsius. Half a degree Celsius is nothing to shake your finger at. It's now 1 degree. So that was back plus or minus 0.5. We are now at 1 degree Celsius above pre-industrial. Just want that to sink in. That is a huge change. So the climate science has become clearer and clearer. And the conversation around that science, you know, people are not denying climate change anymore. That's good, right? It's really not, it's not happening. There's this feeling that maybe it's not going to be as bad as we thought, or that we just have other things we need to take care of. And then there's definitely a stigmatization of the science, even though I think the general public doesn't deny it. It's not possible to talk about climate science right now. It's not really possible to talk about climate change right now. The scientific enterprise in this country has been really gutted in the last few months. The place where I did my work, where I was born as a baby climate modeler, was NCAR, the National Center for Atmospheric Research, the premier institution that builds the best climate models on the planet. It is being closed. So it's a hard time to be a scientist. Is it a hard time to be someone doing climate change work? No. The transformation is on. Okay, that's what I should leave you with. This is happening. This does not need an administration. It doesn't need a bunch of great science. It's happening. When I started all of this, I remember thinking, oh, if we could only have electrified everything, if we could only have renewables that powered electricity and that electricity just didn't rely on fossil fuels. Well, guess what? I mean, of course we still have fossil fuels, but that transition is happening. It's not gonna not happen. And then I thought, oh gosh, I just really wish that transportation were electrified. We just need to have transportation that's electric, that's powered by renewables. That is also happening. I can't remember if China has 50% of their new cars are electric or 90. In this country, it's gone up dramatically over the last few years. So the electric transformation in the transportation sector also happening. It's happening. So now I sit around and I think, oh gee, I wish we could get our buildings. That's the next thing, buildings. So it's electricity, the power that runs our lives for heating, and then transportation, and then it's the buildings we live in. And we're working on that. That's much harder. You know, this building is 40 years old. All the buildings, they're built. So that's harder. The food system, hard. We're going to eat forever, and we are going to need fertilizers. But the transformation is happening. Like, that makes me so happy. And I'll tell you that my news feed, now that I'm at Calyx, boy, do I get a lot of interesting green energy, green this. I have the best news feed. And it's occasionally I read it because I'm busy and I don't read it too often. But occasionally I just read about these random companies doing amazing things to address climate change in little ways, in big ways. And so I see that there's a business that's happening that is changing our world. And it doesn't really matter what the governments say about it. It's happening because it makes sense. And so that is very exciting. But I won't tell you that it's not a hard time to be a scientist. It is, but it's a great time to be out there trying to do something about climate change.
Thank you very much. Please, thank you.
Oh, announcements.
The loveliness that is Harrisonburg in the spring. There is also more time for Q&A and conversation with Deborah over lunch. I think we'll be in the East Dining Room soon, and we're there till maybe 1-ish or so. So everyone's welcome. Get your lunch. I think some people, come see me if you might need a ticket. So anyway, have a great day. Thank you.